welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make this little frame purse. I'm going to show you how to make the pattern and then how to sew it. It has a pocket inside and a chain that you can pull out and use as a shoulder strap. You can adapt this technique to make a pattern and to sew a purse for any size and shape frame that you've got. To make your bag you will need your lining fabric. I'm using a gold satin. Your outside decorative fabric, I'm using some gold sequins. You'll need the frame that you want to make your purse from. I'm using a frame that you sew on. You can also get glue on ones, but I prefer the ones that you sew in place. It takes longer, but I think it's more secure. You'll need whatever you want to decorate the bag with. And my frame also has these little tabs to attach a chain handle, so I've got a length of chain to use for that too. The purse frames come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colours and finishes. You can get them with crystals on this part of the top as well. This is a small one that I use for making little coin purses and little pouches. I'll show you one of these finished at the end and show you how you can use the techniques I'm going to show you for this bag to make one of these as well. Here's my pattern for this bag and I'll show you how I made that. So the first thing I do is draw around the outside of the frame, stopping where this part ends, not where the bottom of the hinge is. So once you've drawn that, I mark the centre as well, and when I'm drawing my pattern I just draw half and then I fold it and trace the other half so it's symmetrical. So once you've drawn around your frame, you need to add 1 centimetre either side and then draw a sort of new frame fading from the top of the frame into this 1 centimetre that you've added. This just gives you a little bit of extra fabric front and back so it's not so tight. I then draw the size and shape that I want the finished bag to be. So in this case I've come out a little bit at the corners and just done a really soft curve at the bottom. Once you've done that, add 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way around. I draw this on half, fold it and then trace it so I get a symmetrical pattern. And this is what you will have ended up with. So just to recap, draw around your frame, mark the centre, add 1 centimetre either side and draw that up into the top of the frame. Draw the shape of the bag that you want, add 1 centimetre seam allowance, fold it in half, trace it and cut it out, and that's your bag pattern. For this style of bag I also like to put a pocket on the inside. So I've drawn a square which when folded in half will sit inside on one side of the bag like that. So that's my seam allowance, so the finished pocket will be the size of that inside mark. So next I'm going to cut 1 of these in the lining satin, 2 of these in the satin and 2 of these in the sequins. The first thing I'm going to make is my pocket for the inside of the bag. I've already stitched my label on and the fold will become the top of the pocket, which is why my label is where it is. I folded the pocket in half and pinned it, and now I'm going to stitch my 1 centimetre seam allowance around the edge, leaving a little gap at the centre bottom to turn it through. Now it's stitched, I'm going to trim all my corners and turn it in the right way. I'm just going to use the point of these scissors just to push those corners out. And now I'm going to go and press it. Now the pocket's pressed, I've pinned it onto one side of our satin, which is the lining, and I'm going to stitch down, across and up this side, and as I stitch it that's going to stitch in place the little gap that we left to turn it through. That's our little pocket in. If you want to you can stitch vertically as well and divide it into smaller pocket sections, but for this size bag I like to do it like this because it's the perfect size to put just my keys and a lipstick into. So next I'm going to take my satin lining and pin it right sides together, and take my gold outside sequin fabric and pin that right sides together as well. And on both of them I'm going to mark where to stop sewing, which is at the line where we added that extra centimetre at the bottom of the frame. Here's my outside fabric pinned right sides together. I'm going to stitch 1 centimetre in all the way down across the bottom and up the other sides. For the lining I'm going to do exactly the same, so I've marked where the bottom of the frame is here, and I'm going to stitch down and across, leave an opening and then across and up the other side. So there's the lining and the sequins. Now these are together, what we need to do next is box these corners, and this gives our bag a little bit of a base. Oh, by the way, if you want your bag to be a bit stiffer you can interface these parts. I like my bag to be quite floppy, but totally up to you. This pattern's so versatile, you can make it into whatever you want it to be. To box your corners, what you need to do is grab the corner, pull the 2 layers apart, push your seam allowances one way. You can see I've got the corner with the seam allowances going backwards, and then you need to make sure that your seams are lined up equally on both sides. So I just pop a little pin through and line my seams up that way. So I sort of put that pin through and then put the seam over it, because you want them to line up perfectly. So that ends up looking like that. And then I'm going to do the other corner, and I'm going to make sure the seams are going the same way. And then once they're pinned in place, I stitch 2 centimeters in from the stitching that's already there, and I'm going to stitch right across like that. So I'm going to do both corners on this fabric and both corners of the lining as well. Here's how the corners look once they're stitched. I'm just going to clip the excess off all 4 corners now. So you can see how boxing those corners has created a little base for our bag, and depending on how far in from your corners you sew depends on how wide that base becomes. I've also just pressed the side seams open, because this is our seam allowance to join it all together. I press it open, but I stop just before it goes into the curve around the top of the bag. So I've done that on all 4 side seams. And now the next thing to do is to add my decoration to the outside before we join it all together. So you can decorate these bags, you can leave them plain, you can decorate them with whatever you want. I've done ones where I've gathered and pleated fabric on both halves before I've joined the fronts and backs together as well. But for this one, I've got this gorgeous pink embroidered flower patch that I'm going to put on. So I'm going to pin that and play with it and see the best way to make that work with the shape. And then I'm going to hand stitch it on with some clear thread. My decoration is all sewn on, so now it's time to join the lining and the outside together. So I'm going to turn this inside out and then pin it onto the lining right sides together. So I've got it pinned right sides together. At the side seams I've pinned it so that the seam allowance that we pressed open has stayed open, and when we stitch it we're going to stitch 1 centimetre in but then fade it right down, and as we go across this join here we're going to be pretty much just 1 stitch down from where that seam starts, and then pivot and then fade it back to the 1 centimetre seam allowance back around there. Here's how those sides look when they're stitched. So you can see that those seam allowances have stayed open, and I've stopped my stitching just a fraction down onto that side seam there. So now I'm going to clip all of these seams and then turn it in the right way through the hole we left in the lining. So here's our bag all together. I've just machine stitched closed the hole in the bottom of the lining, and I've pinned all the way around the top to hold it flat. And the next thing we're going to do is join it onto the frame. Now this bit can be quite tricky. With the frame that I'm using, I want to make sure the handle is at the back. So that's that side and that's that side. Now before I sew it on, I tack it in place, and I'm going to use a contrasting thread colour for this. I've already tacked the back half of the bag on, so this is what we're aiming for. It doesn't matter if it looks messy, it's just to hold it in place in the frame for now. So how I do that is I start at one end and I use the needle to push the bag into the gap in the frame like that, and then I use this thread just to hold it in place. This can be quite tricky to get started, but once you get going it gets easier, and don't worry about how these stitches look for now. So push it into the frame. You have to sort of kind of hold it and stitch it. These bigger frames have quite a big gap. Some of the little frames, they're really narrow between the front and the back, and if you end up with too much fabric, it's really hard to wedge it into the gap. So take that into account if you're going to be using thick fabrics like denim. So just keep sort of pushing it and stitching it, pushing it. So this is how it looks, just tacked into place, and now we can sew it on properly. To sew it on, I'm going to use a double thread, and I'm using a gold thread so it blends in with the frame. You can use a contrasting colour, or you can use embroidery thread if you want to make a feature of it, but I like it to be subtle, because especially when I've got a pattern on the bag like this, I like that to be the standout feature. So what I'm going to do is from the inside, I'm going to come up, so from the inside to the outside, then you go down the next hole to the inside, then go from the inside back to the outside through the same hole again, and then go outside to inside through the next hole. So inside, back to the outside through the same hole, and then onto the next hole, and I'm going to continue this all the way around on both sides to stitch it onto the frame. Then once it's on, I'll remove those tacking threads. The last job to do is to attach the chain for the handle, and to do that I'm just going to use my pliers to open up the links at each end of the chain, pop them through and then do them back up again. So you can have the chain either out, or you can flip those down and pop it on the inside, and that's our finished bag. Little pocket inside, plenty of room for your phone and your keys and your money and all sorts. So you can use exactly the same method to make different purses with different frames. You can get all sorts of variety of these. You can buy them easily on eBay or AliExpress or from your local craft store, or you can find old handbags and take the fabric off and reuse the frames as well. I made the pattern for this one in exactly the same way, so I drew around it, added 1 centimetre, drew the shape that I wanted, added my seam allowance, and then I boxed the corners on this one as well as I was sewing it, and it's just a great little coin purse, and it actually fits really well inside the one we've just made. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up, please comment, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll be back soon with more videos.